How do you know which players are going to pop off if given the opportunity? It's not easy, but I'm going to take a look at something called Value 30, a way that we can determine some players who've got that really sky-high potential. It's coming up right now. Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free. We're available on all platforms. This is just a simple show. Nothing too complex about it, but it's just trying to look at a bunch of players. I think we've got about 35 different guys here who are just some names to keep an eye on, right? They're just some names to keep an eye on. We will do some more sleeper and flyer type shows later this week. I just thought this was a nice little easy, light show that we could get into, that we could have a chat about in terms of the valuation of some players. Reminder, Monday, October 16th, US time, 4:30 p.m. Eastern US time. Live question and answer show on YouTube. Join me. We're going to run about 3 hours. Me, other analysts will be here as well. Get your questions ready. Bookmark the show and be ready to join me to get whatever fantasy questions you have. We will get to as many as we can over that 180 minutes that we're going to do. So be ready for that. As I said, we are looking at something that I called Value 30. We had it for a few years over on Basketball Monster. I think I'm probably going to get it put back on there this season. And let me just explain what it is, because we're all well aware of what per 36 value is. You take someone's minutes and you project it to per 36 minutes a game, right? And I looked at that and we'd see the numbers, and there were a bunch of limitations with it. We can go in and look at players' projections for per 36 and go, wow, if this guy played 36 minutes, yeah, look at how good he would be. But there's a couple of things to look at. No one plays 36 minutes, number one. So, I didn't really agree with that per 36 thing. Very few players play 36 minutes a night. That's just not a common thing to do. So what I wanted to do is to find a way to look at players that if they were pushed into a temporary starting role, which I gave them as a 30-minute role, right, on average, gave them 30 minutes. So you say, well, Josh, isn't that just as simple as instead of reducing everything to per minute, then multiplying by 36, you reduce it to per minute and multiplying it by 30. What the hell are you talking about, you weird Aussie dickhead? I mean, sure, sort of. The difference here is that when you look at traditional per 36 rankings or projections, whether that's on Basketball Monster or whoever else you want to look at it and search it, what it does is it puts everyone's numbers and translates them to 36 minutes. So Jokic sits at number one and go, what would Jokic's numbers be if he played 36 minutes? What would Joel Embiid look like if he played 36 minutes? What about if Kawhi Leonard played 36 minutes? How do their numbers look? Oh, that's really, really good. This guy is 114th in per 36 value, because all of these weird benchy sort of players have jumped up and moved into this zone of their per 36 numbers looking crazy because of the way that it all works. And it doesn't really give this great idea, because if one of your guys, if you're looking at his per 36 numbers and ranking it against everyone else's per 36 numbers, it's not relevant to you, because these sort of guys, not everyone automatically then plays 36 minutes. That's not the way that goes. These guys don't take those level of jumps up. Yeah, for example, I'm looking at my per 36 projections at the moment, and we look at, say, a Kyle Kuzma, and he becomes the 150th best player in per 36 rankings. Oh, that's silly, because he's going to be ahead of everybody else or a lot of other players in terms of minutes. You look at try to find another guy we can look at in terms of per 36. Like Terry Rozier is outside the top 140 in per 36 rankings. Does that really make any sense? Like, not really. You say, hope you're getting what I'm doing. So when you look at traditional per 36 rankings and projections, everyone just gets put on a per 36 scale. Every single player. And yeah, that might mean you find a guy down at 400 who might be actually a relatively relevant guy, but because we're putting everyone on the same scale, Grant Williams comes in per 36 at 411th. All right, what does that tell me? Nothing. All right, because there's not going to be 400 other players playing 36 minutes. Do you get what I'm getting at? I hope so. I hope this makes sense. So what I did with value 30, as we called it, is that I translated every player if they played 30 minutes. But then I used those per 30-minute stats and said, what would this look like ranking-wise if they were just put into the regular player pool? Not everyone playing 30 minutes, not everyone playing 36. The regular projections, the regular rankings, where Tatum's playing 37 minutes a night and Luka's playing 36, or Jar's playing 32 and Jaren's playing 30 minutes. If this particular player that I'm looking at found himself in a 30-minute role, where would he slot in between these guys? How would he look? Now, there are different things we can look at, because usually if you ramp your minutes up, your usage might come down, your block rate might come down. A lot of your rate statistics normally drop down a little bit. And I haven't gone into significant detail or really factored that in, because that's a part of it. It's more just like, if we see this guy into a different role because of injury or trade or whatever, which are the guys that have that real ability to be fantasy influencers? Because Isaac Okoro might push into a 30-minute a night role. That doesn't mean that we want him on our fantasy team, because he doesn't have that fantasy profile. But if you look at a per 36, he might be at 350th. You go, well, how do I actually judge that? Because not everybody else is getting 36 minutes. I feel like I'm over-explaining this. What I'm going to do now is go through guards, forwards, and centers, looking at a bunch of names using value 30 who would become startable players in a 12-team league, theoretically, give or take, based on their current numbers, if they force themselves into a pseudo-starting role. Yeah? That's what the idea of getting to this is. I hope I've explained it. We're going to go through a bunch of names in a sec. Today's episode is brought to you by the Game Time app. Killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Whatever event it is you want, concerts, baseball playoff games, NBA opening week games. The tickets that you want are there on Game Time. They have so many different great things and great options for you. In fact, one of the best things they've got is this thing called Zone Deal. You just pick the section that you want to sit in, and Game Time chooses the seat. And on average, you'll save 18% on those ticket prices. That's one of the many things they've got. Flash deals, event cancellation protection. They've got their all-in prices, so the price that you see is the price that you pay. And that's not what you get on other ticketing sites. So, take the guesswork out of buying tickets and download the Game Time app. Create an account and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, so you've sat with the idea of value 30 now. I hope it's permeated through. I hope that I've explained it well enough. Let's take a look at some guys who I think we need to keep an eye on. We'll start with the guards, which would make sense. That's the wrong screen. That's the screen from earlier on. Let's do it again. That's better. Should be better. Fingers crossed it's better. It is better. So, guards. Names to pay attention to. Jaden Springer in Philadelphia, the package. A guy that has looked really bad as a rookie, improved as a second-year guy, really good G League numbers, and has a chance to be a rotation guy for the Sixers. Shake Milton is gone. We don't know what the hell is happening with Harden. There is still Beverly and Melton and Maxey there, obviously. But if something happens, and we saw it with Milton last season, Maxey and Harden went down, Milton came out, top 3 player for a week. Springer has unbelievable steal numbers. He's a solid passer. He can block shots. The shooting and the offense has improved. If he was to find himself into 30 minutes, he would be a top 100 fantasy player. Give or take, right? He would be someone that we would rush to and go, oh, I am very interested in this. This is a very interesting player if he found himself in that role. Jordan Goodwin, we saw this last season actually. When Jordan Goodwin would play minutes, when Beal would be out and Delon was dealing with that hamstring injury in Washington, he would outplay Monte Morris many times. He's a guy with generally pretty strong defensive stats. He can be iffy with his shooting, but now he's in a situation in Phoenix where he is the only actual point guard on this roster. I guess you could count Saban Lee, but he's a two-way guy. Yeah, there's Booker and Beal and all those guys, Eric Gordon who'll handle the ball. That's all true. And Goodwin may not even be an every night rotation player. But if one or two of those guys goes down, Booker or Beal, I would imagine that Goodwin would get an opportunity to start. Now, would he be a guy that needs big usage to get top 100 numbers? No. We have seen him in the past do it through basically the Thompson style. Rebounds, assists, steals, blocks for a guard. A very, very good permanent producer who would fit nicely in the top 100 if he got 30 minutes. These next two are absolutely the easiest ones. You knew they were coming. Timothy John McConnell, we saw it. He's the third string point guard this season because Andrew Nembhard and Tyrese Halliburton are 2 and 1 respectively. But last season when Halliburton went down and Nembhard was playing the 2, which I don't think is going to be the case this season, McConnell came in, played 30 minutes a night, dominated. And he will continue to do that. Big assist guy, good steals guy, improved his three-point shooting, solid rebounder, okay scorer. When he is on the court, he will put up numbers. This should surprise nobody, nor should Delon Wright, who, again, if you use 9 category rankings, that will tell you that he was ranked 50 spots higher than Giannis last season, which of course shows the folly in those ranking systems. But Delon is a massive steals guy. He's a good out-of-position blocks guy. He's a solid shooter. He's better as a free throw shooter than he used to be. He gets assists. He gets rebounds. If there is a situation in Washington where Tyus is out and Delon has to start, we add him immediately. Again, there are certain situations where you don't add immediately. Like say in Minnesota, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, I'm not sure that he's got the permanent chops at the moment that if he was starting, that I'd necessarily run to add him. I'm not sure that I would. Shake Milton, who's actually not on this list, but he'd be a name that I would look to add. And TJ McConnell and Delon Wright would be as well. Gary Payton, the doctor, old GP. Another one of those players. Now, his body, he's one we take with a grain of salt. I don't think his body can handle 30 minutes. But he is a extremely weird point guard in terms of very high field goal percentage. Not great assists, but unbelievable steals. Solid enough blocks. Can pass a little bit, rebound a little bit. But that high efficiency, high steals, solid rebound assist type numbers, we've seen it in the past. If the minutes push up to 30, he becomes relevant. And the other one there is a younger player, and that's the big stiffy himself, Bones Highland. A high usage guy who's a pretty good assist and threes guy who can hit free throws. And if Westbrook does happen to get hurt and Harden isn't there, well, Bones' usage will come down, playing alongside Kawhi and PG, but he would be an automatic add. We saw him in 23 minutes a night even last season be a 12-team league player. Give him 30 and he slots into the top 100 really easily. Some other names which are pretty obvious to see as well. Chris Dunn. We saw it. We saw it last season. He's the best point guard currently on the Jazz. I don't know how much he's going to play there, but if he does play 30 and he's a starter, we add him immediately in 12-team leagues. That is probably one of the clearest paths out of anybody on these lists so far, Chris Dunn, to having 12-team value. Amen Thompson. He hasn't played a game yet. Cool. I know that Amen is going to be a guy that stuffs the stat sheet. Getting 30 minutes in Houston is going to require a Fred VanVleet injury, and Amen should be drafted in the later rounds of every draft, even though the path without injury for him to get enough minutes is pretty shaky, and it's probably not there. But we would immediately add him if something happens to Fred, or Amen shows how good he is and he just plays anyway. Dante DiVincenzo, we saw that also last season. Steph was hurt, Wiggins was out. DiVincenzo had top 100 runs. He's going to be buried in New York with Grimes and Hart and Quickly and Barrett and Brunson all there. Tibbs runs a narrow rotation. 2 guys go down. DiVincenzo plays 30 and he's a 12-team guy. One of those guys that we feel a level of value in. Now, I could even throw his teammate Juice McBride in there as well. He's a little bit further down the pecking order, but he's got some interesting numbers too. Malik Monk. He's more in the Bones Highland mold. When I talked about the ADP and ranking shifts earlier on today, I looked at Monk and his ADP had dropped or maybe his rank had dropped to one of the sides. That's curious. Nothing really changed to make that happen. And that team was so healthy last season that if Fox or Herter, or even like a Murray or somebody, or Davion Mitchell gets hurt for more than 5 games, Monkey's going to have to do more than what he did last season. Which, if he's a 30-minute a night player, great scoring, high threes, big assists, good free throws, it's a really valuable player. And that is also why he's in a key role, as a 6-man role, and all it takes is one thing for him to really blow up. That's why we like him as a later round pick. Alex Caruso, well, what did I say about Gary Payton? The same thing. I don't know that Caruso's body can withhold 30 minutes, but if he does, he is a top 90, top 80 sort of a fantasy guy. Steals, assists, rebounds, out of position blocks. The difference there is he's not a good field goal guy, but he's have an ability to produce across multiple categories, and he's an unbelievably impactful player, which means he's always going to have a role, but can he play 30? And if anything trends towards him playing 30, he's a must-draft player. Jalen Suggs is also one of these interesting players, and that is one that should absolutely just get your ears to go, sorry? Excuse me? We didn't Hulk Hogan our ears towards her? Like, what? Ew. Suggs is starting. Now, does Jalen Suggs starting mean 25 minutes a night, which it was in the past? Or does Jalen Suggs starting mean 32 minutes a night? Because Jalen Suggs playing 32 minutes a night is probably close to 2 steals. It might be 0.7 blocks. It might be 4.5 assists and 5.5 rebounds with 2 threes and 13 points. Doesn't sound sexy, but it's good. And that is why, again, I like taking Jalen Suggs in those last rounds. The path is there. Whether they do that or not, I don't know, with Anthony and Harris still around in the backcourt. But he's there, and if he performs, the numbers look good. DeAnthony Melton, an obvious one as well. We know this. Melton plays 30. He smashes the top 100. It's the biggest unkept secret in fantasy. Will the Sixers ever do that? I don't know. How will they use Maxey, Harden, Beverly, even Springer? Melton's going to have a role. It was more like 24 minutes towards the end of last season. But we know that Melton has to be drafted, and there's extreme upside in him. And the other one is Malcolm Brogdon, who I don't think is playing 30 minutes. But if he found himself in a role, Scoot injured, traded to the Clippers because Russ was struggling and he was ahead of whatever they want to do, 30 minutes of Brogdon is a top 100 guy. He didn't play 30 last season, coming off the bench in Boston. But if he finds that role, he's still a guy who sits outside that range at the moment, that if he plays those 30 minutes, we feel good that he produces. Don't you wish that your brain just worked with you and was able to do the things that you needed to do? Because sometimes it doesn't. And that's where BetterHelp and therapy can come in and help. Your brain can get in its own way, and sometimes you need that assistance to be able to figure out, what am I actually doing here? How do I get through to myself and do the things that I know I need to do but have been avoiding? Therapy can help you get there, and that is where BetterHelp comes in to be able to get you into the right place and to understand the techniques and strategies to be able to figure out how you do things to better yourself. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and it's suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire, and that enables BetterHelp to match you to a therapist, because if you don't have a therapist where you have rapport or things make sense between you guys, well, it's just not going to work. If you don't connect with your therapist, you're not going to open up, you're not going to tell them anything, and it's going to be a pointless exercise. So you do the questionnaire, they try to match you up best, but if you get in there and go, this is where there's no vibe here, nothing's going on, you just can get a new therapist. No extra charge to find that one that matches with you to be able to get the most out of your sessions. Make your brain your friend with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedonnba today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba. Let's look at some forwards now. There's not as many forwards on this list, and you're not going to be shocked at all to know that the majority of guys who get these big value 30 bumps are centers. We know this in fantasy. There are plenty of centers who aren't particularly good real-life players, who I don't think are going to be really good real-life players long-term, Daniel Gafford, but can really benefit from fantasy rankings. And I don't even pay attention to turnovers. I turn them off when evaluating players. But despite what some people might think, some people think, well, centers, they just get devalued in fantasy. I think it's the opposite. I think they get overvalued in fantasy with the way that rankings work. And you'll see with the amount of guys that if they found starting roles would absolutely put up huge fantasy performances, maybe you'll sway your opinion on that too. I say all that to tell you that not many forwards pop up as these really great per 30, value 30 options. I've only got 8 of them here. Some of them are very interesting to us. The number one guy I've got on that list that I just wanted to touch on is Jalen Slauson. Who is Jalen Slauson? He's a two-way guy for the Kings. Now, there's almost no way that he plays this season or does anything. But sometimes it's just about knowing the names. Charles Bassey. Spoiler, we'll talk about him later. Who was a guy that was I think he was a two-way for the Sixers. And then went to the Spurs and then sort of buried and then got an opportunity. And now we see what he can do. It's just sometimes knowing the names of these players. And Slauson is one of those guys who put up insane numbers in college that would be just tremendous for fantasy. It's unlikely to happen, nor is it likely to happen for Thad Young. But if everything went awry and Siakam was traded and then Porter was injured, well, both of those things could really happen. Jalen McDaniels is currently hurt. Maybe they dust off Thad Young, who, if he was able to play 30, unlikely, but if he was able to play 30, we would add him. Out of position passes, unbelievable steals guy, always has been, good rebounder, solid percentage player. He's a really good option. The man down the bottom here, sticking his little ass out, Bob Covington. I don't know whether Bob Covington's going to start. I don't even know whether Bob Covington's going to be in the rotation. But the narrative from the Clippers suggesting that he might be in the mix to start or be in the rotation means we should take a good, hard, long look at drafting him in those final rounds. Is there a 50% chance that it works out? Not even close to it. It's probably much less than that because we've still got to deal with what the hell do we do with Batum or Morris or KJ Martin. Can Covington actually get 26 minutes a night? It's a long way to get there after being discounted and overlooked all of last season. But there are enough little positives that I go, yeah, okay, well, let's have a crack here. And someone go, Josh, why do you keep taking Covington around 11, round 12? And that's the reason, because if Covington plays 28 minutes, he's a top 75 player. And that same person goes, well, I'd rather just take him in round 12 or round 13. And another thing I will continue to stress, round 11 and round 12 and round 13 are the same thing. They are the same thing. The value of those players is the same thing. It's like when you're in an auction draft and you're taking your $1 players. They are the bottom 40 players. Round 11, round 12, round 13, round 14 are the same. And if there is someone there with a high value upside, not Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, not Harrison Barnes, but Bob Covington, well, if I want to get them on my team to see how it works out, I take them in that round. And if it doesn't work out, you know who will appear, who will give me KCP, Harrison Barnes value? Well, DeAndre Hunter will appear. Or you'll get maybe Bogdan Bogdanovic get dropped and I'll go and add him. Or Dante DiVincenzo pushes into 25 minutes and I'll add him. There's just so many options to replace. There's not options usually to replace a guy that if he plays 28 minutes, he's a top 70 player, which is what Covington can be. And then that takes me on to the other guy who is one of the poster men, blokes that we know about for this sort of thing, is that's John Isaac. There is no path for John Isaac to play 30 minutes a night. A, his body can't handle it. B, he's behind Franz Wagner and Paulo Banchero. So it's not going to happen. But the forward depth behind those guys is Joe Ingles. Sure, there's Jet Howard. He's probably more of a guard. Sure, there's Chuma Okeke, who's not very good. If Isaac plays 25 minutes a night, it's a gigantic if. If he played 30, well, we know that he has that chance of 2 steals, 2 blocks. That's probably more 27 minutes. But he's been a fantasy stud so many times in the past. I have no faith in his body at all or that path to minutes. But if we're going to talk about guys with value 30, Isaac has to be mentioned. And the next 4 guys on this list are relatively obvious ones as well. Matisse Thybulle. Talk about 2 steals, 2 blocks. He's maybe not a 2 blocks guy, but he might be 3 steals, 1.5 blocks in 30 minutes. He might score 6 points, but he also might have that through 2 threes with 4 rebounds and an assist. And those defensive stats with the consistency that he can provide them in the volume that he can. If he played 30, he'd be great. Now, I think he's more of a 21-minute-a-night guy with Shaedon Sharpe coming off the bench. But all it takes is an injury. Simons gets hurt. Scoot gets hurt. Sharpe gets hurt. And then Thybulle's backup is Toumani Camara, who looked pretty good, actually, by the way. Chris Murray. And Thybulle plays 30, and then we roster him. He's not Isaac Okoro. Offensively, he's just as bad. But he just racks up defensive stats. Jalen Johnson. Well, there's no debating this. He has to be drafted in every draft. I've got no idea whether he's going to start, but what I do know is that DeAndre Hunter's hurt. Sadiq Bey's a little bit banged up. And they both aren't very good. And Jalen Johnson's had one of the most impressive preseasons out of anybody in the NBA. Shooting looked better. Shot blocking, great. Rebounding, solid. Scoring, good. Assists, yeah, I can do that too. Can you, Jalen? Well, apparently he can, yes. And if he played 30 minutes, we're smashing the top 80. Not even a question. Has to be drafted. And if your league hasn't drafted him, go pick him up. His value 30 is high, and the path for playing 30, it's very clear. And of course, Tari's second season. We know what happens. Big steals, big rebounds, out of position assists, some threes, solid field goals, good blocks, path blocked by Dylan Brooks and Jabari Smith with a sprinkling of Reggie Bullock for some reason there. But if Ime Udoka goes, I need Tari out there 26. I need Tari playing 30 starting over Dylan Brooks. Unlikely. Well, that's a guy that's going to, I won't say smash through, but knock on the door of the top 50. Very, very obvious, that one. But you got to always remember that. And the last one, which is pertinent, is Kyle Anderson. Jaden McDaniels is hurt. He might not be ready for game one. They started Nickeil Alexander-Walker last game instead of Anderson. But Kyle Anderson in 30 minutes might get 7 assists and 7 rebounds and 7 points or 12 points. With Towns out last season, Anderson was an unbelievably good fantasy player. All he needs is that role. Now, on a healthy team, he doesn't have that role. He's got 22 minutes a night, especially if they're going to play more Naz Reid, another name we'll mention later. But Kyle Anderson is an unbelievable per 30, value 30 option that maybe is going to have that little bit of a chance at the start of the season. And now, we've got to talk about centers. And there are lots of them. Now, it's unrealistic for a lot of these guys to get to 30 minutes and be useful. But just think back. Think back to the days of the Thunder and playing Olivier Sarr, or playing Jalen Horde, or the days of Moses Brown dropping 2020s. Think about those days. Think about the days when Boban Marjanovic would get a start and you'd stream him in and he'd put up 18 and 11 with 3 blocks. This is what centers do. They are absolute fantasy studs a lot of the time when they get minutes. So you look at the top of that list and you go, Neemias Queta. And those of you who aren't Portuguese might go, who's he actually play for, Josh? He's a two-way guy with the Boston Celtics. And the Celtics center depth is Al Horford, it's Kristaps Porzingis, and then it's Luke Cornett. And Queta is a very good shot blocker, strong field goal percentage guy, good rebounder. The holy trinity of big men. And it's not out. How crazy is it to think that Horford misses 30 or Porzingis misses 30 and then Cornett and Queta are the centers? I know it sounds crazy. It's not. O'Shea Brissett's not a center. Queta, watch him. JaVale McGee, he's in Sacramento. Still high field goal guy, good rebound guy, good block guy. The holy trinity. McGee or Alex Len, I don't know who the backup center is. Or is it Trey Lyles? McGee was trash last season. I think he might actually be cooked as an on-court producer. But there's still that little flickering there that if something happened, we pay a little bit of attention. Mo Bamba is an actively bad NBA player. I don't think he's good at all. It looks great. Shot blocking, 3-point shooting. Wow, what an awesome combination. But watch him, right? He's bad. He's out of position. Offensively, he doesn't shoot well as he should. He's Bol, who's not on this list, but probably could have been. But if Nick Nurse likes Bamba over Reid or turns Reid into a full-time power forward, Montrezl Harrell's out, Bumba's the backup, and who's in front of him? Oh, yeah, it's Joel Embiid. So if Bumba played 27 minutes, like he did 2 years ago in Orlando, he'd be an absolute fantasy stud. We know this. We keep an eye on it. He's probably getting 0 minutes a night. But if he doesn't, there's value. Day'Ron Sharpe, one of the best permanent rebounders in the NBA. He is the backup center behind Nick Claxton, unless you think Harry Giles is making the roster. Sharpe has some interesting things about his game. He has some issues defensive positioning at times, but he's shown some shooting flashes, some rim protection. Not a bad free throw guy, and brings the holy trinity. And if Claxton gets hurt, he will be their starting center, and he will bring down double-digit rebounds. and he will be a value 30 option. Alperen Şengün's nemesis, Bruno Fernando, is on this list. I can make jokes about the Bruno Fernando situation last season because it was objectively funny to see an NBA coach think that way. Fernando now is a member of the Atlanta Hawks, and he is the third string center behind Okongwu and Capella. I don't know whether Capella's going to be there all season. And then all that would take is one injury to Okongwu, and Bruno's a 27-minute-a-night center, getting a double-double with 2 blocks, maybe a steal, and shooting good percentages, which, of course, means that he's a top 100 player. He had those little moments last season for the Rockets, and part of the reason I wasn't super into the, hey, man, I don't think this is a long-term thing, is because I think you are bad as a player, and I cannot see how anyone with actual eyes that work would continue to start the man. And, of course, that changed after about 2 games. But we're looking at these guys that if something happens and they are forced into that role, we need to pay attention. My man, Goldfinger Charlie Bassey, we saw it as well last season. Opportunity for him with Collins and Pirtle out. Had some issues with fouls and still will, but he's turning it up again in the preseason. I actually think he fits pretty well next to Wembanyama, and he looks like he is the number 1 backup center behind Zach Collins, a man who has notoriously been unhealthy all his career. Even last season, we came back from that injury and then suffered like a bad laceration to his hand, and that he struggled to be able to close his hand. So Bassey is actually someone that if you're in a league that goes slightly deeper, you want to have him. Just if you've got an ability to stash, that upside for him is huge. And then there's the big fella down the bottom, Goga Bitadze. It was always a weirdish fit in Indiana. He got waived. He got claimed by the Magic. And at the end of last season, I don't know if he's going to start this way. For the end of last season, though, he took over from Mo Wagner as the backup center. And Wendell Carter Jr. has always had issues staying healthy. If Goga plays 27 minutes a night, he's a top 100 player. Value 30 shows it. He can block shots. He sometimes flashes shooting. He sometimes flashes passing. But it's the trinity. It's the field goals. It's the blocks. It's the rebounds. And we talk about pathways. Mo is currently the backup. Doesn't mean he always will be. Goga is an interesting name there. We'll talk about the 2 idiots in Indiana. Apologies to these guys, but we know how much they frustrated us last season. Isaiah Jackson and Jalen Smith. It doesn't detract from the reality that if they were to find themselves in starting roles, that they would eventually be 12-team players. Jalen Smith had a starting role, but he was so bad on court last season that he got benched. Isaiah Jackson can't stay out of foul trouble, but we know that he might have 5 blocks in 5 minutes, along with 5 fouls. These are, if we knew that they were getting 30 minutes a night, we would 100% add them. We wouldn't have confidence they would stick there, but we would add them. Chris Boucher, he probably would have been the number 1 guy on this list a few years ago, but he's fallen away. He's like 31 now. The 3-point shots disappeared, but he still blocks shots. He still can be a rebounder. He still can be a field goal percentage player. It's the path to getting there in Toronto's tough with Pirtle and with Achua and all those other forwards mixed in. But if Darko Rajakovic says, no, I actually like Boucher, and he's back on the menu for 26 a night, well, we add him. Obviously, if he gets 30, we add him, but he's just not going to do that. I like getting Andre Drummond in deep leagues. Do I think Andre Drummond is a good player? Not particularly. Do I think Andre Drummond, if he was a starter, would put up huge numbers? Yes. He's reined in some of his absolutely outrageous usage that he used to have with Cleveland, and now he's a high field goal, high rebound, good steal, sneaky passer at times, sneaky steals guy, whose free throw is annoying for sure, but he's useful. And if old mate, 33-year-old Nikola Vucevic, who played 82 games last season, misses 10, 15, Drummond will get those starts and he will be useful, and not useful, must roster. Because their other center is, do you know? It's two-way rookie Adama Sanogo. That's their other center, who I think is actually going to be a pretty good player, to be honest. Xavier Tillman. We saw this last season. Steven Adams went down. Tillman started. Brandon Clark's out for the season. Well, out until March. Tillman can steal. He's not a good shot blocker, but he's a good field goal guy. He's a steals guy. He's a rebounds guy. He's a pretty good passer for a center. I thought he defended pretty well. He's one of those guys that when he's on court, you don't feel like, oh my God, we are getting roasted DeAndre Jordan style. He can actually hold up. He's a guy. A lot of centers, man. Drew Eubanks. Nurkic goes down, we all immediately add Eubanks. Deeper leagues, you hold Eubanks. You have him on your roster. Eubanks has had injury concerns himself, but we've seen it 2 years in a row. Nurkic gets injured or fake injured. Eubanks starts. He swings fantasy contests. Might do it again. And then there's the big fella in Minnesota, Naz Reid, who, dropped 22 points in 18 minutes last game? One of the best per-minute producers you will see. Maybe a top 50 guy in value 30. Getting there is hard. Can he play with Towns? I think he can. The shot for him was very interesting last game. He was banging in threes. So can he play with Gobert? Maybe. Could he get 23 a night now? It is tough to get there. But they paid him like they want to use him. He's a really intriguing player who probably should get drafted in a few more 12-team leagues than he currently is. Not have super confidence in, but probably should. Couple more centers. Mo Wagner. I talked about Badadze. I probably should have talked about Wagner at the same time. But if Mo starts, he's a 12-team guy. We saw it last season. Rebounds, field goals, can block, can pass, some shooting. He's shown it in the past with the Wizards. He showed it a little bit with the Lakers, and he showed it last season with the Magic. Dario Saric in Golden State. Their rotation's a little bit wonky. How does he play enough? How much do they go small with Green at center? If Saric found 28 minutes because of multiple injuries, then yes, we would use him. I bet you were wondering how long it was going to take me to get to Paul Reed as well. Well, here we are. Paul Reed is a very, very clear value 30 guy. If he plays 25 minutes, we add him. If he plays 30, he beats the top 50 probably. Whether that's behind Embiid, if Embiid's hurt, or playing next to Embiid, or doing both. We draft him in every draft because the pathway is there. And then there's two absolute Josh Lloyd favorites that you know about, Isaiah Hartenstein and Larry Nance Jr. Nance's body probably can't sustain 30 minutes, but if Valanciunas gets hurt, Nance is going to have to push up because it's just him and Cody Zeller then. Nance is currently hurt at the moment. And Hartenstein in 30 minutes is a very easy top 100 player. Now, he's not going to get that because Mitch Robinson's there, but there are times when Hartenstein is a better player than Robinson. Not all the time, depending on the matchup. But he's a more viable offensive guy. He can pass, he can shoot. That doesn't mean anything to Tom Thibodeau. But if something opened up and Tom decided that we weren't going to go with Jericho Sims, Hartenstein would be that guy to add. And there is one more bunch of guys for centers. There are a lot of them who we need to talk about. Kelly Olynyk. I am not ruling out that Olynyk ends up playing more minutes than John Collins this season. I don't think it's likely, but he's very good. And we saw it last season. Put him in a starting role and he's a valuable player across fantasy leagues. So if he found 30 minutes, we'd have him. I don't think Christian Wood's very good. I'm sure you've heard me say that just a couple of times. But there's one thing that I will tell you about Christian Wood is that when he plays, he puts up numbers like nobody else. Not like nobody else, but close enough to it. Does it lead to teams winning? Almost never. But he's a scorer. He hits threes with good percentage. He's not a good free throw guy, but he's a rebounder. He's improved his shot blocking. He's just a horrible on-court player. But he's a good producer. So we watch to see what his role is. And we add immediately if something cracks. And the last one, or two more, obvious ones, they should be drafted everywhere. Rob Williams, behind DeAndre Ayton, probably plays 22, 23 minutes. Some next to Ayton, but most behind him. Unleash him to 28, and he's a top 40 guy, maybe top 50 guy. We know that. And the last one's Onyeka Okongwu, who we've been waiting for. We're waiting for this breakout to come. And yesterday, starting him at power forward, and went, oh, okay. He's taken threes. Will he overtake Capella? I don't know. But he's a must-draft player. I'd go as high as top 75 in certain situations. But if he did get 30 minutes a night, don't worry about top 75. We're talking top 35 for Okongwu. That is how highly I value him. I think he's awesome, and I want to see it happen. I've got low faith in it happening, but an Okongwu Jalen Johnson frontcourt would get me pretty excited. In fact, this desk, it might lift up without my hands. You never know. So I hope that was interesting for you guys. I think it was, but I don't know. I can't speak for you. Just to show a bunch of guys that it's not just traditional per 36 where those ranking numbers can get a little bit iffy because you're putting everyone on the same scale, which is not real. But just chucking a couple of guys at 30 and then just dropping them into fantasy ranks, I think has utility. Tell me what you think. Follow this podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on the Odyssey app and on YouTube. You thumb that up. You leave your comments down below. Guys, I think I said Stitcher. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.